the firm, which is really focused on leading edge cyber, digital, AI, immersive technologies, and driving those solutions to solve some of our clients' toughest problems. I also lead our iHubs across the country, our innovation hubs across the country, as well as our tech scouting capability. And I'm so excited to be here today with Rob Dale, who's the CEO of Singularity, and I'll let him tell a little bit about himself.
Great, awesome. Well, it's a huge pleasure to be here. Thank you for the invite. I'm sure we'll have lots of people flooding in here, but I've been at Singularity University for 9+ years now. I'm an engineer. I'm a geeky roboticist. So I started a company building robotics and automation for cancer research and drug discovery. Built that up over 10 years. Sold it to Agilent. Worked as a general manager at Agilent for a few years, and learned a lot about corporate bureaucracy and the slow pace of innovation in a big company. Right? It turns out to be very important for what we do today. A big part of your role, for sure, right? You understand that? And then I met this guy, Peter Diamandis, in 2009. They just started Singularity University. And he said, hey, we're going to run these week-long executive programs. You should check it out. So I attended the first exec program at SU. I walked in the door thinking I was the expert on robotics and biotech. And during the week, I learned all this stuff happening in robotics and biotech, and I didn't realize were already happening. I'm like, wow, that's interesting. How do I think of myself as an expert in this space if I don't even see what's happening in my own space? Right? The second big epiphany that hit me was I was learning about breakthroughs happening in neuroscience and nanotech that were converging to ultimately disrupt that robotics business that I built. And at the end of the week, I joked, not really a joke, thank goodness I sold my business when I did, because it was in trouble and I had no idea. Right. Like, why would I care about neuroscience and nanotech? I was building robots for science. Turns out maybe those were the most important things for me, so I didn't pay attention to them. So after that, I got more involved. I pitched Peter on all kinds of ideas. He lured me in, and I took over as CEO about a year later.
That's awesome. Yeah. That's awesome. So just to set a little stage for our conversation today, for the vast majority of human existence, the world that you died in was very similar to the world that you were born in. But that is no longer the case. So let's go back in time. The long bow, which is really just a longer bow, was invented in 1000 AD. But it took over 200 years before it was actually used in its first major war. Let's look at the last 20 years. In the last 20 years, what have we seen? We've seen not only electric cars, but self-driving cars. We've seen the rise of social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. We've seen AR and VR technology emerge. Google Maps. Can you imagine getting around before we actually had Google Maps? iPhones. So it's amazing what we've seen in just the last 20 years. So what we're going to see in the 21st century is not 100 years of advance, but 20,000 years of advances based on Moore's laws. So that's really what we want to talk about today, is these exponential technologies and how they are really going to impact our economies, our organizations, our governments, and the world at large. So let's start the conversation. Singularity has really devoted itself to thinking about the future, thinking about these exponential technologies and where they're taking our taking our world. Can you give us a little insight into why Singularity focuses on that, what the importance of that is?
Yeah, great. So let's see. The easiest framing is to go back to the founding of SU. Ray Kurzweil, the co-founder with Peter, wrote a book called The Singularity is Near, now 15 years ago. It's getting dated. There's a new one coming out at the end of this year, maybe the beginning of next year. So The Singularity is Nearer is coming out soon. And in that, he really described why technology moves exponentially, how it accelerates. And essentially, it's as we digitize technology, we empower it with information layers, it's able to move at an accelerated pace. And that is critically important because we think more or less linearly. All of our systems and processes are very linear and slow at best and can't keep up with an accelerated pace. And that basically means we are ripe for disruption. And Ray, the reason it's called Singularity University is that if you forecast an exponential curve, if you think about accelerating change on a forward-looking basis, at some point, the amount of change that we undergo is so immense that beyond it, it's almost impossible to imagine what it's going to be like, right?
Yeah.
And so it gets most popularized thinking about computer intelligence surpassing human intelligence, which is a hard thing to qualify around intelligence. But if you look at robotics capabilities, you look at biology, you look at all these different things, every aspect of our lives, every business, every industry is going to see these singularity periods where the way that we've done business for the last 50, 100, 1,000 years is about to be radically transformed. And it touches everything. And so massive opportunity, really, for designing and crafting an amazing future. So for SU, a big part of our mission is not just to help people understand the space of change, but to also forecast where we want to go. And so we have a framing for what we call the global grand challenges, the biggest problems facing humanity in the future. They align with the UN Sustainable Development Goals. But if we're going to help a company think about its next business opportunity using AI, well, let's also look at using AI for solving the world's water problem, because now there's a big business opportunity for a new multi-billion-dollar arm of a company to also transform how the world has access to clean water. That's good for the world, it's good for business, and it's sort of stepping stone to a very positive future that we can imagine.
That's great. That's great. So, what are the exponential technologies that you're most excited about?
Wow, all of them really, because they're all accelerating, which is a crazy thing. And so one framing that I like to think about this is, I love Gartner's hype cycle. Yeah. So if you look at Gartner every year, they publish this amazing hype cycle, right? The things that go from the world wakes up to Bitcoin is the one that I think is the most telling right now, right? Bitcoin hit peak expectation last year and dropped off. And everyone now is like, oh, Bitcoin, that's nonsense. This blockchain thing is not really going to be valuable. It's a really hard problem. And we're in this, what Gartner calls the trough of disillusionment. And the reality is the capability behind that to automate transactions and make them transparent is fundamental to every piece of society. And so we are now in this phase where we're going to slowly build these new capabilities for every kind of interaction that we make in business, in industry, in government, you name it. And it's the companies that see that and they start building the small pieces of productive value today that are going to be way ahead of everyone else. Because, and I would say right now, the world's sort of like, oh, we're not touching that, we're not going to invest in that, and now is the time to jump in big because it's a huge opportunity space, right? So that's interesting. AI, obviously, overall, is probably one of the most powerful spaces, and you have to really break down what you mean by AI because it is it's a huge space. Yeah, it's everything, and there's a few categories of it that I'm excited about. Maybe just one I'll throw out is around AI assistance. So this capability of having natural language processing is incredibly powerful, right? It just means that if there's a whole body of information out there, I can send my digital assistant to go and look at it and answer questions for me. Yeah. Where that's interesting is there are some big companies like Google and others that are taking all the bodies of work of, say, some thought leader like Da Vinci, right? Take everything Da Vinci ever wrote and put out in the world and give that to an AI that you can ask questions to. And now let a 5-year-old talk to this AI. The learning that you get out of this is not a book any longer. It's just like, hey, I'm curious, like how do you think about engineering and how do you do this other stuff? And basically you have contextual learning, which is more human. That's like a human learning case rather than having to like read stuff in a book. Right? That's going to be transformative. And so back to sort of the government side, there are lots of manuals and documents for how to do every specific process, and most of the populace can't deal with filing fees and just taxes. Taxes are a great example. There's like so many. There's probably no tax attorney in the world that could cite all the tax pieces, right? The tax codes, right? But an AI has them and has them instantly. They can pull them up instantly. Yeah. So as we can work with these assistants, it's going to just streamline every process in a way that's extraordinary. And in terms of user interface, great. I just want to like save a little money here. I want to be more conservative here and more ambitious here. Great, AI can navigate that. So there's a massive opportunity space. as this contextual learning and sort of this natural interaction process happens, boy, every opportunity pops up. Interestingly, we're also exploring where NLP meets NLP. So as natural language processing intersects with neuro-linguistic programming, I think that's a part of the world that we're dealing with right now with the media, where we've got Cambridge Analytica, we've got the whole Facebook backlash. We can manipulate these tools in such a radical way that that's a problem that we're going to have to deal with. So the flip side is, if I can better understand how I'm thinking and what cognitive biases I have, and do that in a more automated way, it opens up to me being more effective in my actual intention. So I love the intersection of all these different technologies and where they allow us to do the things we've always done, just dramatically better and more specific and consistent with the intention that we set.
That's great. That's great. So, what technologies are in the trough of disillusionment, or maybe not even getting press at all, that you're excited about or keeping your eye on?
Yeah, definitely blockchain is a whole wave of different things. But another one that I think we need to talk a lot more about is genetic engineering and CRISPR specifically.
Yep.
A few months ago, the first children were born in China, a pair of twins that were genetically engineered, right? Really, there was just an edit in one gene that now these children were born. They're still basically kids, they just sort of switched one gene. And it was done in a way that is very problematic, because basically we're engineering kids without there being any clear processes, and the whole world sort of rebelled on this. What's interesting is most of the world didn't even see the story. That is very notable to me, because we are at the dawn of a new species of humanity. Right? We're going to usher in this technology to allow the eradication of all genetic disorders. We're going to eliminate all genetic disorders. Over the next 20 years, there's going to be an amazing transformation in the healthcare arena. And at the same time, that same capability can allow us to introduce new sort of edits to the genes. It'll let us make them a little smarter, a little taller, a little more
pretty,
blue, maybe, yeah, blue, or some other things that are not human, right? So there's a whole following called describing it as Homo evolus. I think Juan Enriquez was the first person that coined it, which is amazing and is going to be incredible, but tests every aspect of humanity.
Yeah. And
we fight over race and wacky, straight differences that are meaningless in the face of having someone that's 11 feet tall and blue, right? So I will say, here's my forecast: the Olympics in 15 years are not going to be the same. In fact, I will suggest that the Olympics 15 years from now will go away, full stop, or they'll be transformed into the enhanced Olympics, where fighting over doping and stuff is ridiculous. Fighting over like how much these people have been enhanced for those games, that's a different thing. And my biggest concern right now is the US's take and morality and ethics around this is different than in China specifically, is different than the Middle East, is different than Brazil. So who decides the future of humanity? Right? This one, it's out there. It's not really a dark horse, but nobody's paying attention to it. And it is going to test every fundamental religious, every fundamental societal impulse. It's pretty basic for us, and it concerns me. That's a big one that concerns me.
So let's talk a little bit more about that. We had a great panel yesterday on the ethics of AI, but it's not, as you said, just the ethics of AI. It's bioengineering and lots of things that are going to come along. And where does, human intervention, especially around lethality and other issues, when does that, where does that go? How far are machines allowed to go? So what are your thoughts, and how is Singularity doing around kind of the ethics of these really exponential technologies and the convergence of them?
Yeah, so the role of SU to date has largely been to create a safe space with an extraordinarily diverse group of people to safely explore these topics. And the way that we do that in our programs is we basically help people see where technology is today. So it's like, here's all the crazy breakthroughs in all the different spaces, all the technology areas. Here are the drivers. Here's where it's going over the next 5, 10, 30 years. you see, you can't deny the intersections and the mass of change that this is going to create. And then we spend a lot of time talking about, okay, well, what does this mean?
Yeah.
What does this mean for my kids? What does it mean for education? What does it mean for health? What does it mean for longevity and how long we're going to live? And then what does it mean for the insurance companies and everything else? And so that quickly gets into all of the ethical and moral questions.
Right.
And the way that we help that conversation is usually lots of wine and beer, because you really need something to sort of take the anxiety level down a little bit as you explore these topics.
Right.
But that's also part of a design experience that we help. So we've been talking a lot about how do we more directly influence some of the thinking around the policy science on some of these topics. And so some of our faculty are really starting to step into influencing energy policy, biotech policy, and others. But first, it's about, let's make sure the right people are in the room.
Yeah.
That if it's about the future of humanity, let's make sure there's a representation of humanity that's there, right? So let's get a group, let's get a diverse group. Professionally, we want to always have startups, corporates, government policymakers, nonprofits and foundations, academic creatives, and investors there. Because if you have those 6 constituent groups, you have everything you need to ideate, start, and scale a solution that's going to tackle the biggest problems. If you get good, full geographic representation from all the different continents, if you get socioeconomic representation, gender representation, age representation, then you get an assortment of humanity that is really unique.
Yeah.
And I think you came to a program in the fall and you said there was like people from 39 countries, in a group of about 90 people.
Yeah.
That's pretty unique, right? You end up having different kinds of conversations, and you end up very quickly seeing how everyone feels differently about these topics and where they feel the same. And so for us, it's about bringing a safe space together, but then let's make it more and more constructive and aligned to creating some real outcomes. And influence on policy and investments specifically is probably where we're most interested.
That's great. So, we've talked, these exponential technologies, they can be exciting,
Yeah.
but they can also be scary and daunting. How does Singularity help organizations think about embracing and moving forward? Because it's seeing the future and thinking about something that changes at the rapid rate that we're talking about can be unfathomable.
Yeah, totally. So SU as a whole, I would say I would describe what we're trying to help everyone do is to shift from linear to exponential and then participate in shaping the future, right? So we all want a better future for ourselves and our kids, so we all have a role to play in that. And so we try to set the stage for that. There's 3 key components of how we do that. One is first this mindset shift around understanding technology, understanding the future, and understanding our roles in it. Second are new kinds of tools and methodologies to move at an exponential pace. And the third is plugging into a different kind of ecosystem and network, right? It's this better representation of humanity, this global exponential network that's unique. For corporations, we try to help them through that whole journey as well, but specifically around top-level strategy. So how does a company think of technology and innovation as top-level strategic initiative? Because as you look far enough out, every company is going to be impacted by technology in a radical way. So it has to be, the CEO has to have an innovation initiative directly. Then it's the leadership skills and how everyone thinks about and talks about technology and innovation. And then the discrete innovation processes. How do you actually deal with blockchain? How do you deal with quantum computing? Like most companies don't have anyone internally that has any understanding of what that is, let alone the skill sets required to experiment on those, right? So we try to help companies first see the reality of today and the opportunity space in the future, then start testing and trying some new tools to move at a different pace.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So at Booz Allen, we have been consulting to the federal government for over 100 years. We have a strategic innovation group that really focuses on identifying these leading edge technologies and driving them into the government. What do you see as kind of some of the future, the big things that are going to impact government going forward?
Yeah, we've talked about a few of them already, right? I think every aspect of AI is an interesting consideration. Some of the things that I that I'm interested in getting more involved in is what's the role of government around technology specifically?
Yes.
And right now, we're in this phase where, forget about the politics side. Obviously, this administration has a particular liberal mentality around business, but also testing regulation for technology companies. There's Silicon Valley is like a bad word today, right? So and there's talks from the Democrats about breaking up Facebook.
Yeah, Amazon went first. I heard that the other day.
Yeah, right. I'm like, wow, we've got some extremes at work right now,
right?
From the political side. I think the government's role is better focused around being a convening force on topics that are important, right? So if the president or someone says, "Hey, we want to do a deep dive on the future of agriculture," for example,
right,
which would be an amazing thing to really take seriously and focus on. Let's get all the companies and the technology companies and the industry leads together to talk about the future of agriculture, and then how do we actually think about where we want to go? Like there needs to be some envisioning of what's the core. Where do we want to take it? And then the next step is, well, what do we do about it? So I would love to get more involved in investing, aligning. So the other thing the government can do is invest a lot of money, right? So DARPA, ARPA, ARPA-E, these have been extremely successful vehicles for ushering in the future in technology, right? The internet exists because of a government project, right? That's how it happens. Robotics, the state of robotics today started with government contracts. We need more of that. And let's focus it on problem spaces that we know we need to solve more of. And on the ag space, let's double down on the future of the ag business area, potentially creating incentives, but at least investment vehicles for new technologies that will reduce methane from cows and pigs and chickens, right? Right. That's actually a massive contributor. So I think it's like 15% of our carbon problem is from ag. It's from the ag space, right? 15% of the whole climate, the carbon addition to the climate problem is just from the ag industry. We're doing a great job, which by the way is the entire total of all transportation, land, sea, and air. Yeah. Agriculture alone contributes as much, actually more, than all of transportation. And we've got the transportation thing pretty well underhand. It's moving fast. We're shifting to solar, we're shifting to electric, and it's happening, right? The industry is doing it. Yeah. But the ag isn't there, right? There's not an industry yet. There's a lot of incentives and other structures against it. The government can be a good convening force for saying, hey, there's a whole new wave of technologies that will allow us to leapfrog and get to the next phase. We can have incredibly clean food and energy. The technologies in Silicon Valley around the future of food and actually stem cell food, so meatless meat. Right? So instead of growing a cow, you grow tissue in the lab. It's the exact same. I'm getting some funny faces.
I tried it when I was at Singularity.
Yeah, I promise you, 10 years from now, all of you will be eating burgers that were never alive. Just say it now. But if I could tell you the quality of this burger, it's the exact same meat. You could have the best tenderloin-like meat that you've ever had, but I can tell you it never walked on the planet. It was never abused as an animal. There's no hormones. The quality is guaranteed, and it's the exact same tissue. It wasn't genetically engineered. It's the exact same tissue. It's the same meat that you were eating otherwise. It's just actually perfectly controlled in a system. Over time, it's going to be way cheaper as well. So you're going to actually eat it because it's way cheaper. Because I guarantee McDonald's will be selling this off the hook right as soon as the price drops. That's what you'll have access to. That's where we're headed, and that makes sense to me. Great. It also saves the world in many regards from a big part of the climate problem.
Yeah. So you just painted a picture of meatless meat, which I saw some reactions to.
Yeah.
What are some if you painted a picture of 20 years from now? We just talked about some of the amazing things that have happened in the last 20 years, which is hard to even, if we go back 20 years ago, could we have imagined, driverless cars? Could we have imagined, AR/VR? What do you think the next 20 years are going to really bring us?
Well, there's a couple big trends that I think are in that 20-year time horizon that are massive, and I don't want to say they're inevitable because It is not determined by any regard.
Right.
We have to choose where we're going to head. And I think, again, the government has a big role to influence where those investments going and what are we trying to regulate and slow down. So I think the ag space is going to be extraordinary. Yes, we're going to re-engineer every aspect of food, right? We've been fighting about GMOs for a long time. It's nonsense. It's proven out empirically that it's a solved problem. It's not an issue, really. But we're going to make our food industry way more efficient. The other things that we talked about genetic engineering. That's coming fast.
Yeah.
I also think in a 20-year period, we're going to solve a lot of the diseases that currently plague us. We're learning a lot about the body today, about the mind, about the microbiome, that as you take all of this data and you look at it, right, all the correlations between all these data sets and actually how you feel, and you have an AI that's looking at how you are doing every day and all your Fitbit data and everything else, and everybody gets onto the system, we're going to solve every problem. Like it's a mechanical system that we're now learning how it works. It's going to take 20 years for us to really figure it all out, right? But there's a lot of amazing work, and it's fundamental right now. So I think we're going to cure cancer. It's just a matter of time. Is it in 20 years? I don't know. I'm hopeful, right? But I think we're getting close, which means we're going to live longer.
What was it Ray says that if you can live through the next 10 years, that you're going to live to like 114 or something?
Well, so I mean, there's a tipping point.
Imagine
longevity that some of the sort of edgier folks, Ray and Aubrey Gray and a few others, they suggested, and the timeline is questionable, but it's, you know, every year it's basically 15 years away, which is it's one of those things where like every year it's 15 years out, right? But you know, in a 20-year window, so I think Ray's forecast is, it's in 12 years. If you live for 12 more years, and he's trying hard, like he's doing everything he can to make sure he's healthy in 12 years, right? Every year you gain another year. So like potentially there's a point at which you can live as long as you want. Now it's theory, who knows if it's real, but for sure, we are going to live, the average lifespan is going to increase, and potentially radically so.
Right.
Which for the role of governments, and pensions and insurance, wow, that's going to have an impact. You think about your investment strategy for retirement, you don't get to retire at 60 or 80 or 120. Like that's the fun future you're going to have to face. But if you were 120 and it was like you were 60 today, you're healthy and all right, why would you not work, right? So that's a tectonic shift that's going to take a lot of like time for us to figure out and socialize and deal with, but it's coming, and I think we're going to see that pretty directly in a 20-year window, which is exciting. The other, I think, tectonic shift that we're seeing is access to information, right? So the internet has done amazing things and some horrible things to the world, right? Right now we're sort of dealing with some of the realities of access to media and how it's being manipulated and privacy and we're in alpha phase of a prototype, and we're learning what it's doing to us, and now we're getting smarter. The beta's gonna come out soon. It's still a beta, right? It's just still evolving, and it's gonna keep evolving. But within the next 5 to 7 years, pretty much everyone on the planet is gonna be on the internet, right? Because there's projects like OneWeb, satellites, Google Loon, a handful of other interesting projects that are working really hard to connect everyone on the planet in the most remote of regions to access the internet at 5G, like 100 times better than your internet today. Everyone, no matter where you are, will have that level of bandwidth, which opens up a whole new wave of capabilities and possibility, right? So one, just being able to access IBM Watson Doctor in the cloud from a remote village where you're traveling anywhere and have better medical diagnosis than your doctor can do today, that's extraordinary, right? But imagine 3 to 5 billion more people who are accessible online as a workforce. Like that's an exciting possibility, right? So now you've got 3 to 5 billion people coming online who are now going to be educated through Coursera or whatever the next wave of the education technologies are, who are going to have the greatest skill sets, probably even better than many of the people we can hire here today locally.
Yeah.
Because partially they're hungry, they're just jumping in, they're looking to become AI driverless car experts, right? And they're finding those tools online now, right? So imagine the innovation and the creativity that gets unlocked with that many more people being educated at that level.
Yeah.
It's going to unlock something extraordinary. And I think the governments of the world are going to have to deal with it also,
right?
Because now you've got a lot of really smart people who are going to accept nothing less than a lifestyle that they're going to demand.
Yeah.
Which the populist movement and everything else that we have is kind of a backlash to tech, in my opinion, backlash to technology and access.
Yep.
And its power structures, like trying to hold on tight. You can't hold on tight when everybody's saying, nope, this is what we want.
Yeah.
The government is representatives of the populace, and when the populace says, hey, this is where we're going, you either come with us or we take you down, I think we're going to see a lot of turmoil over the next 20 years. So I'm very pessimistic short term.
Right.
I think we're going to see a lot of social unrest. But I'm very optimistic long term. Because I think on the other side of that is an extraordinary future. We just have to have the social, political, and individual courage to articulate it and do the change to get there.
Yeah.
But it touches everything. And so it's a big, scary project.
I know you're passionate about the future of work, and you just kind of
Yeah,
talked
sure.
a little bit about, imagine unlocking the potential of, workforces globally.
Yeah.
And education Coursera, I think, is amazing. But what do you think, what are some of your thoughts around the future of work? What's it going to look like for our children?
Right. So
Or their children?
Yeah. So I have a 5-year-old and a 2-year-old at home, and I know fundamentally that their future looks nothing like my past. Right.
Right.
They're never going to drive a car. They're never going to go to college, at least anywhere like the way that I went to college. They're going to go into space. I'll probably go with them. And preparing them for that it has to be different, right?
Yeah.
And so when I think about my kids working in 30 years, to me it's not going to be the same.
Yeah.
Because I'm kind of a robotics guy, and I've seen the pace of robotics over the last 20 years, and I see where it's headed over the next 10 years, and everything, so I'm going to go way out. I'll just zoom as far out as I can, take it or leave it, you don't have to believe it. But everything we do physically will be done better by automation and robotics. Everything. We get to choose whether we want robots to do it or we do it, but that's going to be a choice. It's going to be cheaper, faster, safer, more efficient to have a robot set up these chairs in this room in the future, right? It's just, that's what it's going to be. Now, is that 30 years from now? Is it 50? Is it 100? That's a tough forecast. But it's going to happen. If we choose to allow technology to keep advancing in space, right? I don't know if it's really a choice, but let's just say that it is. We're going to have those capabilities.
Yeah.
It's not just the physical stuff too, it's most of the cognitive stuff, right? And what that triggers in most of us is deep anxiety and fear, right? Because one, most of our jobs are also our identities. That's a big shift that has to change, right? So we're gonna have to reconcile that. And I'm a big proponent of change of our education system. I think the greatest travesty of the world today is the degree, the college degree, because it has created this industrial mindset around working really hard and getting to this point, and then you're set. And then you can just sit back and you can just do it, right? You work really hard, you got that job, and fantastic, now you're set. It creates this mindset that is exactly the opposite of what you need to survive and thrive today and into the future, right? We have to completely shift to a continuous learning, lifetime learning mentality.
Yeah.
And that has to be at our preschool, it has to be in every level of education, it has to be in every industry and corporate job as well.
Yeah.
So corporations, I think, have real responsibility to invest in continuous learning internally. The idea of, now we need a whole bunch of blockchain specialists working at Booz Allen, we got to fire all these other people and hire all these new people. that doesn't make sense.
Right.
It's going to be really hard to keep doing that at the right pace versus investing in continuous learning. Because if you can say, hey, here's where the future's going, we know we're going to need skills in these areas. Let's give opportunities to people to get there.
Yeah.
It has to shift radically to that point.
Right.
So I think short term, there's a lot of opportunities for ways that we can do it at home, in the schools, in companies, and the government around continuous learning mentality. Long term, however, let's go back into the future. I don't think we need jobs in the future. We don't need jobs, those things that we have to do to survive. Right? We're through technology, we're going to be able to create a future where energy is virtually free, which means water is clean everywhere, food is ubiquitous, it already is actually, shelter is guaranteed, the greatest education and healthcare is provided to everyone, is accessible to everyone on the planet at a level that's far better than any of us could pay for today. Right? The richest of us can't pay for the education and healthcare that will exist 20 years from now for the poorest in the villages in Nigeria. Right? That's a big change.
Right.
So we're going to enter this time where we don't need to work to survive. We may choose to work for identity or other purposes, but we don't need to work to survive.
Right.
So then what's the point? Like, that's the fear. Our fear is like, okay, there's nothing left for us, so what do we do? And I actually think the opposite is true. It's an amazing, exciting opportunity where we can then be more human. We can actually do the human things, which is like, it's definitely not toiling to survive. It's not warring over scarce resources. It's about, why are we here? What else is there? How do we connect as people, right? And so I classify it as the three endeavors for the future of humanity. And so as I think about 1,000 years from now, what are humans going to do? Now, I do think there's probably 10% that are going to just like tune out into the VR marijuana world, right?
Little Ready Player One.
Yeah, I mean, you're just gonna like boom, you're gonna be in a surreal whole thing.
Yeah,
that's okay, that's fine. But I think most of us are gonna be liberated by this baseline that we start with, and then we can explore our passions and our creativity and what's next.
Right.
It's an incredible Star Trek future that I think we can create and is possible, but it doesn't work like the world does today.
Yeah.
Right? And can we make it? I don't know. I'm pretty passionate about it. I want to create that Star Trek future. I don't want the dystopian Hunger Games zombie apocalypse one that Hollywood currently is feeding us.
Yes.
I want that amazing, opportune one where everyone has access to this incredible level playing field. And then what you do with it, wow, that's the exciting exploration of humanity.
So before I turn it over to the audience for questions, what is our responsibility as we think about this future? What can we all do as we think about this future to prepare for and be a part of? Versus, change can happen to you, or you can be a part of driving that transformation change. So what is all of our responsibilities?
Yeah, I'd say there's three pieces. One is awareness and acknowledgement.
Yep.
You cannot stick your head in the sand and hope it gets better. Because on some level, I think that's what is happening right now. People are just like, oh, I don't like this scary future, so let's just, hope for the best and vote for the past. I think we're voting for the past right now. So there's a little bit of just recognition of where we're at, where we're headed, and then engagement and openness to the possibility of new opportunities.
Right.
And that being okay. Because the future is going to be different, and that's okay. The future has always been different. Like there's nothing is different about today than the last 50,000 years of humanity.
Yeah.
It's just moving a little faster. And so we're going to experience a lot more of the change than most of our past generations have experienced. So I think our responsibility is actually to get engaged with being part of the articulation of the future that we want.
Yep.
And then demanding that that's the future that we're headed towards. So I would love, one of the projects that I'm going to pitch Booz Allen on very soon is working on articulating what the future of abundance of energy and food and water looks like in the world.
Yeah.
What does it feel like in the world? How do we articulate that vision in a way that people can emotionally connect to? And then what's the roadmap to get there? What are the problems to be solved and the policies to be created that would allow for this amazing future where everyone on the planet has the greatest healthcare that it's ever existed? How do we create that? Now, when the next election cycle comes up, everybody asks the politician, what do you think about this future? do you want to create that future, or are you just trying to get elected next time? Like, what's your stance on the future that we're creating? That creates a different kind of conversation politically, right, than we've ever seen before, right? And I think that's our responsibility to hold our representatives and everyone else to a different standard as well. And it needs to be longer term horizons, right? Get out of the short term mentality of the next quarterly results or the next election cycle, and hold our representatives and ourselves accountable to spending a little bit of time thinking about the future.
That's awesome. All right, what questions do we have from the audience? Yeah, sure.
So I want to subscribe to this vision of abundant energy and water, healthcare, and all this. One thing that I think could definitely stand in the way of that is climate change. You alluded to it with agriculture, a bit there. I started reading Uninhabitable Earth by David Walswell. I'd recommend to everybody about what if we overshoot that 2 degrees, which it looks like we're heading for right now. I guess 2 things. What are y'all looking at Singularity University, if anything, around sort of how to start taking carbon out of the air, direct air capture and storage? We need to get into that. And do you think climate change is a danger to that vision you were presenting, and how do we deal with that to make sure it doesn't stop?
Yeah, so great question. Climate is a massive existential threat. I mean, for me, I have 4 different things I'm really concerned about. Right now is jobs and work, genetic engineering, climate, and AI. And in that order, really. I think we're screwed. I think we blew it. We waited too long. I think it's already irreparable. Thousands of species are dying off rapidly, right? We're going to lose most of the species on the planet. And so for me, personally, the way I think of it is that we own a zoo. We get to decide what the zoo looks like and what lives on the zoo. We can control it, but we have to first acknowledge that we run a zoo, and then we have to put some design principles in place to make it work. And that is a big leap for most people to get to, right? We are not anywhere near ready for having that conversation. So we have a lot of startups, we convene a lot of competitions, we convene a lot of forums to bring groups together to launch carbon sequestration technologies, to look at new ag technologies. That's why I mentioned this push on ag. We have one of our faculty leads, Ramez Nam, also an amazing sci-fi writer. He's got a great, I highly recommend, he wrote an 8,000 word TechCrunch article a couple weeks ago, which is, I think, the most important piece on energy and ag right now that's out there. And it was actually a response to the Green New Deal conversation. Because the Green New Deal thing has sparked a lot of conversations. It's actually opened up a great conversation, which is very political, which is a problem. But he has some very precise recommendations. And part of it is, let's get an ARPA-A thing rolling. Let's get real investment going on these technologies, because it's good for business, it's going to be good for the environment. That's what we can do short term. Long term, I think it's too little too late. We're going to help, but I think we're going to have to start socializing geoengineering at a scale that today is blasphemous and very scary. But I think we can do it. We'll eventually get there. We'll realize that we want to swim in the ocean and it'd be populated with actual things that are alive. And we can redo that. But it's a whole other engineering project that has its own set of risks. But when it gets bad enough, we do have tools. We just have to have the courage to do it. And I'm not advocating that at all. I just think, unfortunately, that's probably where it's going to end up. And, there's also, we can go off the planet. We can start doing other stuff. And we can use other planets as a test bed for some of these massive changing things. Again, I'm not sure how I ethically feel about some of this stuff, but we have a lot of tools in our toolkit. We just have to decide that that's what we want to test.
Awesome. Yeah.
Yeah.
Here's some of your thoughts on that Mersive Technology as a medium to help people articulate and experience with reason.
Yeah, Mersive Technologies for showcasing these futures. It is amazing, right? The probably the greatest thing that we've seen out of VR as it relates to our future is just the deep emotional connection that we can make around stories, right? You can, and what was the clouds of what was it called?
Clouds of Sidra.
Clouds of Sidra, yeah. So where you can actually go in and experience what the life of a refugee is. Like, you experience it. You're there. You're in the world. You can see what it is. You can actually have these emotional experiences, right? So it's incredible. So there's a design opportunity here for helping articulate these futures that we want to live in. The one project that I like the most right now is The Verge just created a thing a couple months ago called Better Worlds. They just put out a whole bunch of sci-fi videos on different technologies and what kind of futures that could create. Awesome. It's the antithesis to Black Mirror. If you haven't watched Black Mirror, I highly recommend it, but it's like
scary.
Actually, skip the first episode. Skip season 1 episode. I don't know why they launched with that, because it just puts so many people off. Go to the second one, go to the second season. But it's amazing because they dive into what these technologies might create in our world. Better Worlds is like, what could it create that's actually we're excited about, right? And we have a lot of projects that are similar-minded. But I want to see, if you have a project like that, tell me, I will support and invest in it, right? Those are the kinds of things that we want the world to have more access to.
Yeah, sure.
Hey Rob, this is about the augmented future.
Yeah.
I really appreciate everything you do at Singularity.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you.
I got a two-part question. First, what's it like to work with Ray Kurzweil?
Wow, good question.
And then second, what's your view on how artificial superintelligence will affect our society and the government?
Yeah, great question. Okay, so first, Ray Kurzweil. Wow, is the camera off? Let me turn it off. What an amazing person on the planet. So Ray's on my board of directors, as is Peter Diamandis. And I'll here's sort of the day in the life of Rob. So I'll go to a board meeting, and I kid you not, for the last 9 years, it goes something like this. Rob, you're doing way too many things, you need to focus. Now, here's 20 other really amazing, incredible things that you should be also doing next month, right? The number of connections and ideas and things that these guys have are extraordinary, right? Most of them are total crap and are nonsensical and never going to happen. But some of them are so extraordinary that they're going to shape the future, right? Ray is also, he tests and experiments on himself and in the world in ways that most of us would freak out about, right? So he walks the talk. Like, he's not only trying to forecast the future, he's trying to figure it out and create it himself. He's also running a huge AI group at Google to figure out contextual understanding and awareness through AI. And this I would not be surprised if in the not too distant future you will have an AI Ray Kurzweil where you can learn everything about anything that Ray has ever published. Right? This contextual book project that you're going to have, right? So we're working on that. I've also seen Ray Kurzweil dancing on tabletops in a crowd. So he's also human. He's still human, right? He's actually a pretty amazing person. Yeah. Way out there. So then on the second question, sorry, remind me quickly. You were asking about
that was artificial
superintelligence, right? So the way I think about it. The best analogy is from Garry Kasparov. So Garry Kasparov was the first grand chess champion to lose to AI. And what he didn't do was say, oh, that's over. We're done. Like, I'm going to go learn how to be a coder or something, which actually he did. He started exploring it deeply. And he started creating these AI human competitions, right? So like literally months later, he's like, what just happened? I'm going to learn about that. And so he started working with AI. And he started creating these new kinds of competitions where it was like him and an AI against an AI. It was like him and an AI against a team of amateur chess players but amazing coders with AI. And all the different permutations of that. And his last couple of books have really been about that exploration. And I think that, to just think about AI and superintelligence, our fear is that we're screwed, there's nothing left, AI is going to do it all better than us. Which is true for specific things, but humans bring our unique fallibility and creativity and humanness to the equation that, coupled with AI, is something different, right?
Yeah.
And so his writing on that subject, I think, is directionally how we should all be thinking about the future of technology. It's what we can do with technology to potentially be more human in the future. That's the exciting equation. So I would highly recommend his blog and some of his last writing.
That's awesome.
So, first of all, thank you for coming and inspiring everyone. One of the things that, just taking on the topic, you mentioned policy a lot and the role of government.
Yeah.
But one of the biggest flaws is that government takes a long time. It's like snail mail.
Yeah, government's slow. Yeah, yeah.
Of getting change happening. So where do you see the disruption happening on the way that government, and we think about policy and how we do like large scale changes from a more centralized perspective?
Yeah.
How do you think it's going to morph? Because I still think we're going to have some kind of big structure that holds together.
Yeah.
But how do you see this changing and evolving?
So how do we see technology influencing how governance changes and moves?
Yeah.
So two thoughts on that. One, democracy is designed to be slow by design, right? We don't want to just be swinging the tiller and going all over the place based on the latest thought of the day, right? We need stability for the State of the Union. We need some stability, right? Now, we've maybe overdone that, and to the degree that we're not willing to try things or even talk about vision and long-term change, which I'm concerned about. But we do have the capacity to create sandboxes and actually try things and change things, right? Where that happens well is at the city level and the state level, right? There's amazing stuff happening in Austin that is going to influence the state, which is going to influence the federal government as well. There's also a lot of great work and forces where the government knows this, well, one, people use Uber and everything else, and they're like, why does it take so long to book a campsite out for the wilderness? Like, are you kidding me? They have to write papers to do that stuff? So projects like the recreation.gov, we're going to see a lot more of that. Code for America, if any of you are out there, I would highly recommend supporting. Is an extraordinary organization in the world that basically has an amazing number of coders around the world that are just helping solve little government problems all over the place. That's how it's going to happen. It's going to happen grassroots and beyond. Now, I think by design, democracy, it needs to shift also. I think that's for another topic. The flip side is also true. Governments that are more hierarchical, or structured in slightly different ways, can move really fast with technologies, and not always for the better, right? So I am concerned about how quickly a government that is maybe does not believe civil rights are in the best interest of the country, and how they can take technologies and actually suppress people, turning off the internet, doing things that are actually against potentially a vision of abundance that I believe is the future. I'm deeply concerned about that, right? And the area that I'm most concerned around this right now, currently, at the biggest scale, is around using AI as a weapon, an economic weapon and a defense physical weapon, right? And China versus the US is at war right now. Trade, economic, but underlying is our current mindset around AI is it's a war front that we're fighting. That is the wrong mindset, in my opinion, because if we treat it as a weapon, it will become a weapon, and then it'll be very dangerous, and then we've got bigger problems, right? I think AI is an existential threat if we keep down this path of weaponizing AI as us versus US versus China or US versus Middle East or whatever it is, right? That's how we're going to create that enemy if we're not careful. I do think we can eliminate it quickly if we articulate where we all want to go. China, the US, we all want the same future for our kids. Let's treat AI as the force to help us create it. We can all align with that. I've had amazing conversations with diplomats and industry leaders in China. They see it the same way. But right now, the political side is up against that, and that's a challenge. There's a great book that just came out, AI Superpowers by Typhoon Li. I think his perspective is spot on. He ran Google China. He was high exec at Apple in China, and he sees this balance. And he also says we got some work to do to shift the mindset and the conversation around that. So I would recommend that highly.
That's great. We have time for one more question. Sure.
So you mentioned you don't want your kids to go to college. As a current college student, it makes a lot of sense, honestly. The problem is, my partner right here, he's a computer science major. I'm an economics major. Like the gap, or like the chasm between him being able to drop out of school and still do what he does, versus me, even if I had a skill set but not a degree, I'm like hired. How do you think we're gonna get past that? And then I guess the other side of it is, basically if you're in my major field like business, yes, just generally, unless you maybe made a multi-million startup along those lines, it's kind of hard to skip that part of like getting a degree.
Yeah.
How do you see that coming?
So I would say the signs are out there already for the workforce shifting away from caring about a degree, right? There are different ways to gauge your capabilities and your skills. And it has very little, I can tell you, I got a degree from Stanford, and that means nothing. It does, actually, no, it means one thing. It means I'm connected to the Stanford network, which actually by proxy means like I'm at an interesting level, which is what most companies basically use it for. They're like, oh, well, you must have hit this threshold, but I can tell you that a degree at a school, there's a wide spectrum that's kind of nonsensical, right? I think Google just announced a few weeks ago that they no longer require degrees as part of their thing, right? Apple and everyone else is going to follow suit. They're like, we don't care if you got a degree from someplace, it's some other things that are part of the equation. I think we're going to see more and more of that for the foreseeable future, especially internationally. The degree is the way to level up, right? It still is, for the next 20 years, realistically, it's still going to be a big part of the equation. But I do think more industry-leading companies, Booz Allen has an opportunity, other companies at that level, they just say, hey, look, we're now looking for people with these skill sets, and there's different ways to find them through competitions, through local outreaches. There's going to be more and more of that. And I will say what's going to force that is over the next 5 years, as 3 to 5 billion more people come online and say, hey, I'm the best AI coder you're ever going to find. No, I didn't go to any of these schools, but here's my code. You're not going to compete with that if you just hire from somebody from Stanford because they had a degree. You got to find different ways of assessing that, right? So I think there's a real opportunity space for assessing skills and aligning them specifically for jobs and opportunities and future opportunities. And actually, that's the space where I would like to see more work, which is how do we classify the next tier of opportunity space and find people who are poised to be very adaptable towards them. I do think adaptability is going to be a much more important part of the equation going forward.
Awesome. Well, thank you all very much for coming today. Thank you, Rob, for
Awesome.
joining
Thank
us.
you all.
Amazing conversation. I'll grab Rob.